All right, welcome to another episode of La Rhetorica podcast. I am Arnie Partin, La Rhetorica. Today, I am joined by Dr. Prerna Subramanian. Dr. Prerna Subramanian is an interdisciplinary researcher and assistant professor at OP Jindal Global University. Her research focuses on how queer, trans, and caste-marked lives are represented, regulated, and reimagined in Indian and transnational media cultures. Her writing has appeared in Feminist Media History, Gender, Place, and Culture, Agenda, Sociology Compass, Media Asia, South Asian Review, and with Duke University Press. Her current book project explores how trans intimacies and urban governance in Indian streaming media and urban streaming media. In addition to her academic work, she works as a freelance editor registered with the Editorial Freelancers Association, where she takes a neurodivergent approach due to her own lived experience with RSD and ADHD. Dr. Subramanian, thank you so much for being here.
Was Dr. Patterson for having me.
How are you?
It was a very weird morning because I'm supposed to teach on Friday mornings, but there has been an infrastructure collapse in my university. So we had a random shutdown.
Oh, wow.
Hopefully, like everyone is safe now and we are starting back again on Monday. I had a very light Friday morning, which is not how my Fridays usually go. Spending few hours of my Friday evening with you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad we can bring it to a close after an unexpected day. Tell me, besides the shutdown and everything, what's been on your mind this week? What's tugging at your brain?
I think for me, when the infrastructure collapsed, there was one thing that so I'm teaching a course on gender, caste, and society. I'm co-teaching it with 8 other professors. And all of us had meticulously planned everything from to the T as to how the course will go. We are teaching like so many students. And the minute we were told, oh, you can't take a week class, everything had to readjust. It brought some kind of trauma from COVID times where you were told you can't have classes anymore, everything's going to go online or it's not going to happen. But I also felt that a lot of us went back to the tools that we have curated with what happened in COVID. So it was just like things do not go as planned, but the way we coped was with each other. We really had to depend on community, depend on how are you coping and learning from each other's strategies to even survive this one particular certain week of closure. I was just thinking about how much ever you plan, a lot of things are out of your control. And the only thing that you have is your community, your chosen people whom you can rely on. So yeah, that has been on my mind.
Yeah. Such a rare gift, I think, to have that in a workspace, like people that you feel genuinely have your back and you have community. Tell me and our listeners who are mostly in America a bit about the infrastructure collapse. What does that look like?
Of course, this is a university in developing part of Delhi NCR, which is the capital of India, but we are not, we are in the fringes of it. And the interesting part about the infrastructure of the university is that it is built by people who did not know Indian weather as much or did not account for it, but were more focused on global universities to emulate global standards, even if they don't have resources that match those global standards. So there was a lot of like infrastructural problems in the building and a lot of rainfall, which this place actually is an arid zone, semi-arid zone, and it does not really so much of rain which it got. And yeah, things the ceiling started collapsing and student this is a private university, so students pay a lot to come here. It's a private law school, private business school. So there's a lot of a very privileged of students in India who can access this space. They pay an equivalent to what if I want to go, not to Ivy Leagues, but a smaller university in the US or Canada. If I can pay for that, I can pay for this. It's actually equivalent. It's very expensive. I think it also jarred a lot of us as professors who from public universities in India who have had a different experience of what the infrastructure of the university looks like. Very under-resourced, did not have much experience. And infrastructure collapse was an everyday thing for us in public universities. But we didn't pay as much. The amount paying now, I wouldn't have paid for my entirety of education
Wow.
for That's the difference between how privatized universities and public universities work. That's a huge gap. But then I also realized like do it so little, but at the same time, students whose parents are paying so much for an education and also facilities, the university has the name global in it for a reason. It's because it tries to match the global standards for students who might not want immediately to go abroad, which many do. It's not that they can't afford to, clearly they can, but a lot of Indian parents do not want their children to immediately go abroad after school. So they would rather go to a place which is in India, but will give you like a standard of education that matches an Ivy League, you know. I think those contradictions, and at least in the face of nature, collapsed. Nobody expected rain to come, but rain came because it had to. So
Yeah, I think nature is the great equalizer.
humbler.
Have you had any backlash from this, like from families or students?
Students, yeah, actually, all of this started to be. It's not that infrastructures don't collapse overnight. It's very protracted. It only gets registered when either unfortunate tragedies happen, which in this case, thankfully, did not. No lives were lost. In this case, it was more about how it made it outside the university. In the Indian context, there's a lot of this, a very toxic culture of the workplace is your family kind of
Yeah.
thing. What, especially in the university, the teachers are equivalent to parents or the admin is equal. This is because there's this rhetoric of let's keep it between us. This should not go outside. And it's very interesting to see how what we think happens in families happens at macro university levels where, oh yeah, we all know what is wrong with university, but let's not make it like a news item. But when it becomes a news item, it's not only holding them accountable, but it's also, oh my God, we really need to now, because now it has gone out of our hands, out of the bounds of the family. I think that was the backlash because students have always been protesting the living conditions, which doesn't match the amount they pay for, and constantly saying the money. Because this is in the end a private university. Students know that they're signing up for not only quality education, but more than that, resources. This is not in Delhi, it's in the fringes of the city. The idea was to create an education city, much like Oxford or like these campus town, right? Like campus town because they don't have access to the main city as much. There's actually nothing around the campus other than the campus. It's the campus and the faculty housing. So students are pretty isolated inside the campus. The least they deserve and expect is that the campus itself is livable. I feel they deserve better. And I hope this 1 week of holiday does justice to the student. I always think students suffer the most in these scenarios. A lot of admin here is a little top down in terms of like these things happen. Like, why are you making such a big deal about it? But I think they're able to say that because no life was endangered or was lost. So yeah, it's been a very weird time for me, for
Yeah, I
us.
mean, it sounds like a lot. And so, how do you stay grounded when you have all of this going on? Where do you find sort of regenerate yourself?
I am glad that I have a partner with whom I can, when I come back, even on a normal day in the university, need to come back to a space where I am met with a space where I can just vent out or channelize my rage because there's a lot of compromises that come with being in a private place. University, there's a compromise of values, ideals, what you're teaching versus what is happening around you. Also, the larger idea of academic freedom in India is always suspect because there's a lot of crackdown on dissent in India as well, mostly in public universities, but private universities also follow where the money is. You have to constantly work yourself into other molds to like survive while also like having one's values. But so I think having a partner with whom I share my values and I feel safe enough to be like, oh my God, I really wanted to teach this, but I could not because if I do, then it will get out of my hands. So that is one kind of way of, and also having, I read a lot, like I read for pleasure nowadays. I am glad that I can read for pleasure. I think first I used to feel very guilty about, oh, I'm just losing myself in books and being very detached. But for me, it's more like when I read a book and it randomly has an example that is relatable to what is happening in my real life. It gives me a lot of cognitive tools to work through the situation. Yeah. Also, I am right now, the relationship is a little strained, but I used to be a huge part of the fandom of the BTS army, the K-pop fandom. So the relationship is strained right now because of the non-response or perhaps the weird silence on what's happening in Gaza. Just generally because they have always been a band which takes a stand. So it feels a little weird for them to not say anything at all. Like even most vanilla thing that don't kill children or something, like the most basic, no one's asking for nuance or an entire album which is very radical or something. Usually fandom activities like talking to other fans and being in that sort of subculture helped me a lot, but that is taken away from me. I am a huge binge watcher, so I do that. I watch trash TV to rage and
We'll get back to some trash TV recommendations and book recommendations, certainly. But I'm curious because you mentioned there may be some crackdown on dissent and some sort of this higher education culture in India. One of the things that drew me to you is how vocal you are about speaking to power, speaking to truth. How do you navigate this context that you're in with also this desire or passion to speak out and speak the truth?
I think one of the things that allows me to do whatever little or whatever I am able to do on a platform, which is LinkedIn of all places. And I'll come to how I chose LinkedIn. There are many platforms to speak out, but LinkedIn is a very strategic choice for me. So I'll come to that. For me, my caste position and my religious position in India right now is not the one which gets attacked. It's as simple as that. I am a Hindu and upper caste woman. Most of the things that happen do happen in my name in protecting people like me. For me, most of my politics starts from not in my name, politic, and then goes into comradeship with those who are actually marginalized. Because I think for me, it's more like the people like me at the shoulder on which we have this idiom in Hindi, and I'm just roughly translating. We are putting the gun on my shoulder, targeting someone else. I'm just a straw man figure protecting it's very similar, I would say, not the same, obviously, but similar with the white woman who has to be protected from the racialized man or the racialized population. I feel we are, as caste women, are those figures who are like used as props, as people who need protection from all these other forces. So I think that sort of positionality that I've received from my social world allows me to go a little undetected, I would say. So I feel like a lot of my politic emerges from how to leverage that, how to leverage the spaces I can glide into unnoticed. Of course, I get noticed as a woman and a queer woman, sure, but I think caste is so powerful in India as which makes my surname and all of that it gives you a lot of power to do both oppression or stand against it. But I think then the other layer of becoming a social science academic or a humanities academic, will you get noticed if you do a particular kind of research? And the answer is yes. I think that is one thing I can say happens across marginalized and privileged academics. It depends on their politics, how they see the world, what kind of things they stand for, despite what kind of social identities they have been ascribed. So I used to do a lot of campus politics when I was in public universities. I was part of student unions. I was part of student movements in India. I joined private universities as a faculty. So I feel a huge gap between how I experienced university and how my students are experiencing it. I think one of the biggest, the post that went viral or gave me more people to talk with in LinkedIn was one where I was comparing my experience, at least if given the crackdown on public universities, it was because we had spaces of dissent. It was because students could get out of classrooms and mobilize for even smallest of demands. Like, I think no demand is small, but like in this grand scheme of things, asking for like better food, better mobility, or no curfews for women, those were demands. And now it feels like, wow, at that time we felt like we were fighting smaller fights compared to other people. But here, there is no space like that. I always think there's a lack of third spaces in private universities where students can do something not related to their education in terms of getting a degree. My positioning now, that is why I chose LinkedIn, which is a space of lot of professional talk happens in LinkedIn, right? And a lot of my students are on LinkedIn because they are all in the system of I need to get a degree and need to get a hyping job, which is fine. Why would I join a private university? I could have joined my own public university as a professor. I had the credentials, but the pay was unlivable for me. So that is why I chose a space where I find the audience that I want to speak to, but at the same time, I will have to strategize the way I speak about things, which perhaps will look very different if the platform shifts. If it's like a Substack or a Medium where I have full control, preset audience that comes with the platform, I feel, but with LinkedIn, you have to curate even your most broadest thoughts very carefully, not in terms of, oh, will this get me pushback, but more about knowing your audience and who you're speaking to. And that's something I learned as a humanities scholar who got a humanities education in Canada, a very public university known for engineering and business. And even my master's was Institute of Technology, where they had a humanities department. And those were the experiences where I learned how not to preach to the choir. Sometimes humanities and social sciences folks are trained to think in a certain way. So we talk in a certain way and assume the other person will already know the jargon or the sensibility that we come with. But I had a huge learning curve when I did my PhD in a university where none of that was assumed. There were people who did not even know what the word gender binary will mean. So you'll have to like really peel back and go back and see where did I get that knowledge from? How is it so natural for me to just know these terms? That is what I do in LinkedIn is that I try to show that I did not get whatever knowledge or whatever insight I have did not come overnight. It might have come from multiple failures or having not had the right thought all the time. A lot of people see that as relatable, but I think it's more about, I think one thing common to a lot of us is the vulnerability that comes with learning. You need to accept that you don't know something. That is very powerful to me. I don't want to write something where I feel like I'm the sole knowledge proprietor of a thought, but also coming from a place of curiosity and vulnerability helps. That way, I think that's a strategic choice on LinkedIn because people want relatable stories and all of that. But at the same time, anything which looks like, oh, this is dissenting against something will not get the kind of engagement. Like, I don't want rage kind of engagement. I think, yeah, that is the like leveraging the power that I have because of my social identity, but also the vulnerability that shows I am learning myself. It's not that I have reached a point of enlightenment where I know better than others, but more, hey, this happened with me. This is my experience, and these were my lessons from my experience. It helps ground my whatever I'm saying in my experience. If somebody comes to invalidate that, about me. I think that's a strategy that I use.
I see that in your posts. And as you were talking, I was thinking, this is rhetoric, right? You're being really intentional about your medium and you're thinking about your audience, you're thinking about the purpose, the tone, and the way you curate everything. But then you said something really interesting that I don't think a lot of rhetorical scholars talk about is the introspective part, right? You said, how did I learn this? Why is this so natural for me? And you're thinking about the root of that. That was really interesting to me. I want to read, since you mentioned LinkedIn, I want to read the post that really brought you on my radar. You and I are both freelance editors with EFA, and I followed you initially for that reason, to have a community of editors. I'm going to read the post that I have, and let's see if I can get it. Can you see it?
No, on my screen. Yes, I think it's loading now. I can see.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read this post that you made on LinkedIn about 2 months ago. I have edited around 3 dissertations written by women of different racial backgrounds recently. I've observed how women entered the page with so much hesitation that it literally changes the way they write. I read sentences that place distance between the writer and the idea. I read openings that delayed the argument. This quote, this chapter hopes to suggest, quote, the effort here is to outline, end quote. These formulations appeared across multiple projects, across fields. They indicated a kind of learned caution, one that shaped how claims were made, how evidence was introduced, and how the writer positioned herself in relation to her work. The repetition revealed something structural. The tendency to delay, to soften, to redirect the reader's attention toward citation before argument shaped the rhythm of entire manuscripts. The writing moved around itself. The writer deferred. The central claim waited. The structure remained intact. The research sound, the analysis present. Yet the voice of the writer arrived with a kind of hesitance that aligned with gendered expectations about authority and authorship. In many cases, the text relied on language that qualified rather than advancing it. During editing, I returned to these choices. I revised formulations that suggested distance. I changed hopes to argue to argues. I moved citations to follow rather than precede analysis. I treated hesitation as a trace of institutional training rather than a feature of the argument itself. These changes made visible how form and structure absorb certain expectations. They made visible how academic writing conditions writers to explain themselves first, to make a case for their voice before offering it. And it goes on a little bit, but I love that for so many I love it for so many reasons. I'm curious to hear you talk about that a little more because you specified that this was something you saw in a lot of women's writing. I'm curious if you feel that this is something you see globally or just in your Indian context. Tell me more about what was the impetus for this post?
Yeah, it was actually different racial background. So it was one of them, two of them were Indian. One was a white woman from America, and one was Middle Eastern but Canadian immigrant kind of context. So really different racial backgrounds, and I think it was not just the editing that of course, I just took an example because it came when I was editing one of these, I think, and why I put that is because I have been this person as well. So it's not that I noticed this because I'm editing it now. It's just that why I finished my PhD pretty recently in 2023. I have been through the process very recently. I was lucky to have a supervisor and an editor who was kind when giving feedback. A lot of feedback that I got is in my mind when I'm editing. I look for those things, and maybe I was even looking harder for things that popped up to me more than other issues. But I have edited a lot of cis men work as well, like not just doctoral, just I have edited a book which was written by a man. And I just honestly felt in my experience, I have seen that this only happens with women, specifically women who are, racialized. Even though I've done editing for a white person, but I really felt that this is much more, and a lot of it is pushed under the maybe English is not your first language category, but I think it's much deeper than that. Example, for a lot of Indian women or Indian folks, English is our first language, no matter whatever mother tongue that we learn. Like, we work very hard from the first class in school to make English our language. People who are able to make it abroad are people who must have studied in what is called the English medium school. So I honestly feel that kind of assumption comes from a generalization that, oh, this might be her second language or something. So that is one thing that I feel like we can delay that argument a bit by saying I think this does more about how did this woman come to grad school. I feel it says a lot about the experiences that precede the writing experience. The way a person argues tells me how much they thought about it, how their relationship with the supervisor is also very clear in certain ways of structuring their dissertation. I can understand where, if they give me the context that this was needed by my supervisor, I'm sure you must have also, in your experience, if you edited dissertations and not other projects. And dissertations are very interesting to me because they give you a lot of insight into the first draft thought student. And I feel, at least we associate the first draft with a lot of stream of consciousness writing or writing freely. But I think with women, it's the opposite. There's a lot more hedging of that makes it to the world. And the opposite is true for a lot of, in my experience, the first draft is much more confident, and men like to assert a lot of things. It's easier for them to say, I am going to argue this. Like a lot of memes, you must have noticed, like the proposal was so ambitious, but the PhD thesis was not. I don't think that's ever true for me. My proposal was also not that ambitious. It was very like, I don't know if I'm able to do this. I think these many bottlenecks inside our head are at work. So for me, when I'm editing, so the job to edit is to, we know we hear a lot of kill your darlings, right? Just edit ruthlessly. But for me, it's the opposite. I feel I have to find the darlings first. Where is your argument? What do you want? A lot of people lose patience with women writers is because
Mm.
don't just come to your point. Like that kind of equations. Like I had a very ruthless supervisor in my master's. He was a white professor, white man. I always had a very strained relationship with him because he completely changed the way I wrote my master's dissertation. Then I went on to do my PhD and I was supervised by a trans woman and a black woman. They saw how I write post my master's. My supervisor asked me to write this the way I would write a creative writing blog or something, just a chapter. She said this version is going to go on the dissertation, not the other one. For me, that was a breakthrough. Wow, okay. So the way I think is acceptable, the way I write is acceptable. I had been told, oh, this is your thesis reads like a blog or like a rant, or it's more of a rant than a research paper. And that's very hurtful to hear. So, what happened with me is that I started anticipating all that critique while I'm writing. It shows when I'm saying, I hope to argue. Because what if I say I argue, that somebody says that like, I don't. So I'm like, oh my God, yeah, sure. So if I say, I hope, so, then they can't come.
That sense of, I think that sense of hedging comes from this idea that maybe you don't have the kind of authority or knowledge you think you have. For me, it shows a lack of confidence, right? I don't want to come across as too, I don't want somebody to come for me, right? So I'm going to say, I hope to. And I love that you point this out because I do see this as I'm editing dissertations, and dissertations are their own unique,
Genre.
right? I never really thought about the influence of the advisor and how that comes through in the writing. I was really fortunate to have a dissertation committee that supported how I wanted to write my dissertation. I was like, hey, look, I'm going to do it with a lot of narrative, a lot of my own personal story embedded throughout. And they were like, yeah, sure, do it. They were pretty supportive of my vision for that. And can't imagine having any different experience where you feel like your identity gets stripped away from it.
Exactly. In a dissertation, it's
Of all
very,
things. The
yeah,
dissertation is like your introduction to the academy, right? Your introduction to your field.
exactly.
So I'm curious, how do you use your feminist views to shape how you support women of color in academic spaces, women who are writing dissertations, your students, even your colleagues? How does that shape the way you mentor and support?
For me, I was not doing editing work alongside my main work in academia. I was doing it for friends. I won't call it unpaid, but unstructured. Then I realized that to do justice to it, I need to have some structure to it. That's why I started doing it with the Editorial Freelancers Association. So I have a proper designated time and space for doing something because now I have a full time job. I didn't while I was doing my PhD. That way, my in terms of my feminist values, I think they have really been shaped by the spaces I've been in. When I was doing my PhD, I was the equity officer for Graduate Union. A lot of my mentorship work was with international students who were queer men or from various parts of the world, just trying to settle into grad school. So that's where it all started. It started with telling them how to cope with grad school, or just it was a predominantly white town in Canada. Now I'm back where I started my undergrad. Like I studied in Delhi, but it's a very different space, as I've said, right? Now my mentorship is in a private university and I teach in a law school. This is a professional course. a lot of them will become lawyers. That's their trajectory. It's not an academic trajectory for a lot of people. So there's a transactional kind of relationship here where they are more consumers rather than students, and I'm a service provider. Sometimes that is a dominant emotion we share in a classroom, but there are some students who want to circumvent that or not have that kind of relationship. So I make sure there is space for that as well, where I open up my office hours, for example, or space to have conversations that you may not be able to have in a classroom. And the neurodivergent approach is also, I don't assume that class participation looks like speaking in class. And that is also true for not only because of neurodivergence, but something that is parallel, almost sometimes correlated, is the marginalization. So if there's a queer student, a Muslim student, or a caste oppressed student might be very rare in a privatized university, which is topic in itself, but they're still there. I assume that they are there in the classroom first. Second is just being open about having a space that is not just a lecture. Most of Indian education is and has been like that for centuries. So having that space, so like a lot of students come to me outside class where we write projects where they want me to read what they have written. That might not happen in a classroom where they might feel very scared to even say that they have written something. I think that has been my way of navigating this very consumerist space of education that I'm in. And the other came from the place where I am in. There's nothing around us. It's a very semi-arid area. The city is not accessible. And I was missing community building. So I thought virtual communities are also one way of going about it. So having to do editorial, I end up meeting really good people. I have ended up meeting you now because of my LinkedIn post. That is one way of, and also because I spent so much time in America. Like my last, I think my formative 20s to 30s was in America. So like in Canada. So I made really good community there in terms of activism. I think a lot of vocabulary also was learned there. I really wanted to stay in touch with that part of me, even though I geographically moved. A lot of my work also happens online. So that's why.
So I want to go back to that sort of online global community aspect, but you mentioned this briefly, and so I want to ask you, you've written and spoken about how students often write from a place of fear. In this transactional context that you described, how do you create a space for more courageous, embodied writing in your teaching and in a private institution like where you are?
One thing that I know, it's not a foolproof or a bulletproof idea, but one of the things I feel puts that fear into abeyance or keeps it at a low priority while writing is to write in collaboration. I find in humanities ironic that a lot of like our conversations are about, like the theories are about collaboration, or at least feminist theory is a lot about being in community or community practice or collaborative ethos, all of those words. But the person who's writing it is doing it alone. It's that one researcher who's talking about collaboration. I'm like, why didn't you collaborate with somebody? Why is that the writing process has to be such a lonely process? I feel a lot of fear is compounded by the fact that you're doing it alone. I feel doing it with somebody divides the fear across the board. Honestly, the past few writings that I have done in terms of academic writing, 3 out of 5 of them have been with other people. And I think that is because I was so done after my PhD on my own, writing on my own. And I felt like the things I'm talking about and the way I'm doing that thing is so at odds with each other. Like I'm talking about we have to be in community, but I am sitting alone in my head writing this paper and I'm like, something's really off. Sometimes I used to meet my science and engineering PhDs come out of their lab work. One of the things I used to find interesting is that even though the STEM fields are perhaps not that progressive in the output that they're getting, not all of them are dominant knowledge systems. The way they do it is always together. There are like 5, 6 co-authors for one research paper. They will also publish failures in their lab experiment. We in the humanities, we talk about these things, but we don't have that in our culture of research. We are not researching with 5 people. We are doing it alone, especially in the humanities. And we are not like thinking together. co-authorship is a huge political thing. Who do you co-author with? I have told my students, start co-authoring them now. Of course, have your own thoughts, but make it a practice to write with others.
I struggle to write with others. I have co-authored a couple of things with my friend, people, colleagues that are my friends, and I get so frustrated. I get so frustrated because I have an idea, right? Like I have an idea of how I want this to go or how I think it should go. If who I'm co-authoring with has a different idea or process, I get frustrated in the little things of like, how should we organize this if we're outlining, right? Like, how should we organize this document? But it's also been, to your point, it does disperse the fear, especially when we're writing about something that may be dissenting or subversive or in any way controversial or
Yeah.
pointed, right? It does, it's for me at least, I'm not the only one saying this. Here's me and my posse saying this. It's not just me. So it does definitely feel a shared responsibility, but the process itself.
Because I've had some failed collaborations. It's a good learning process. Knowing the kind of people I can work with is a very important thing for me. To especially with, as I said, like I have rejection sensitivity. So if I have somebody whose values are completely at odds, values in as simple as the writing process. Example, I'm very regimented. I have a structure. I have systems at place. And if somebody is, I'm a spontaneous writer. I'm not. Yeah, we are not working together. But that's a great insight. Now I know the kind of people I can work with is people who have systems.
That's interesting. I don't know that I have a system. I think I am a spontaneous writer. Yeah.
Can you said like now you have an outline and all of that. It's an interesting experience out of a collaboration. It was a great collaboration until we wrote it. I think it's one of the best that I have done. But the way they responded to feedback versus how I respond to feedback was so my rejection sensitivity gets very triggered. If there are words there, when I'm saying RSD, it just means I feel bad. No, I have a full on nervous breakdown when I'm probably like immobile and I go mute for hours where I can't think beyond that one line that has just shattered all my confidence. And then there's this other person who's, oh, that's what's a constructive feedback. I'm like, where is the construction in this? I can only see destruction. This destroyed my sense of first. But when they gave me the perspective, I was like, today I'm not ready for it. I'll come back tomorrow. The way they responded, I of course didn't relate to it. I had my own bodily experience. But it was also interesting that the revision phase was so easy compared to something doing alone after having a nervous breakdown versus you deal with this right now. I'll come back to it when I'm able to deal with this sort of feedback. That also helped. Like somebody who does not have such a response to feedback is pretty secure in certain ways. They were able to take that labor around that time. And then I could come back and I did a good job. For me, I felt if I was alone, oh my God, like I will be pressurizing myself to finish this rather than giving my time to process what I just went through. So I think that's one experience which was very taxing, but also enriching in the end.
As we come to the end of our time, I want you to share what advice do you have for people who are working with students who may be dealing with RSD. I don't think this is a conversation I've heard a lot about in terms of how do you structure your feedback or how do you mentor students who may be also dealing with this?
One of the things that helped me was something that I came across online, and maybe I'll share it with you so you can share it with your audience. There's this queer geographer. I'm completely blacking out on their name, but they had a Medium article which calls it revision sensitive dysphoria. That is an article I found, which was their play on rejection sensitivity. It was about how to how to make a systemized way of dealing with distress that you feel when you get feedback. They Excel sheeted the whole thing. What they did is show that you take all your revisions, whatever feedback has come, comments, for example, populate an Excel sheet and actually quantify their stress level versus their difficulty level. And for me, that differentiation was very interesting because differentiated between something can be actually a very easy thing to do. For example, for me, a grammatical error or saying that this sentence sounds warpy. But for me, perhaps if I come with the baggage of always having been corrected for my English or being told that your English I can't understand, it's indiscernible. So that grammatical error is not difficult to correct, but it's very stressful for me to read as a comment. So the minute you write stress N, but difficulty 1, when it's quantified, you're like, why am I stressing about this? I feel that was the only time I really liked numbers. I'm not a numbers person, but the minute I started seeing that the things I'm stressing about may not be actually that difficult to do. And the things I'm totally chill about are like what? Add two more people in your theoretical framework. For a lot of people, that might be like a huge comment. For me, honestly, I'm not stressed about that. That I can do. I'm just passing over that to stress about a grammatical error. So I feel like having that kind of system where I have worked with few people, I have given this kind of system with friends where the minute you get feedback, and sometimes peer reviews can be really, today itself, I was reading it for a friend could not deal with the very blunt things that were written. I feel like we need to take a day to see the actual feedback behind those words. Having a system which is very ruthless in terms of let's just quantify the noise of emotions that we are feeling. And yeah, I think that is worked. Also, knowing that there's always a better place for your paper to go or somewhere else, it's fine. Sometimes it's not the right home. Knowing that there are always other options. This is not the be all end all of your academic career. That has been something that I actively say to myself and others.
These are great resources. We're going to have linked in the show notes for those who are interested. I'm definitely interested in implementing some of these things. For my students, I'm thinking about peer review, how you approach peer review, how you coach your students to give feedback, such important things. I want to hear about this trash TV recommendation. I need to know, what should we be watching? What should we be reading? Tell us everything.
Recommendations as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Trash TV, Trash TV is really, I watch Love is Blind a lot. For me, it's like a anthropological expedition into the mind of like these couples who can't just decide for themselves. It's very interesting to notice people. And it's a very interesting thing about culture, dating culture, and whatever is happening around the world. So that is something I'm watching now. I watch a lot of Korean trash TV also. Korean reality TV shows are very underrated because a lot of people think it's very slow. It's not. It's a very slow burn trash. It creeps upon you. There's this trash TV that I recommend called Better Late Than Single. And it's a show which is a makeover show and a lot of trigger warnings about which come with a lot of Korean pop culture is about body image and their lookism is there and all of that. But most of it is it's interesting how they talk about love. It's a very different culture. The minute you see that and then you switch to an American show, you'll see the difference that I'm talking. It's like whiplash. Book recommendation, I have two. One is Disorientation. If you see my cover page on LinkedIn, I have a quote from Disorientation, and it is a book about actually a PhD student writing a thesis on a Chinese poet, and it's about how she realizes that the poet is not someone she thought he was. So it's very interesting how. So it's also, and related to that book is Yellow Face, which I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a brilliant. It has its issues, but it's a book about a white woman who reads her best friend's who's dead in the book right from the first chapter. She used to be a very famous Chinese American scholar, author. She dies, and the white woman takes over her book. That's why it's called Yellow Face, because she pretends to be a Chinese person and becomes famous. It's a lot about publishing industry, race, about how it's very easy for certain people to claim experiences. It's about being a woman of color so it's written by R.F. Kwang. She writes amazing and dark academia stuff, but this way. So yeah, those are my two recommendations.
Those are powerful ones. Those are awesome. Those will be linked in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. This has been so wonderful. I hope I have you back for another
Yeah,
conversation. How
yeah,
can people reach you if they're interested in contacting you or learning more about your work?
yeah, that'll be amazing. I look forward to that. Thank you for giving me this platform with you. It's amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. How can people reach you?
through my LinkedIn. They can just type my name out, and I think I'm the only Prerna Subramanian there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to pause the recording here.